Hello everybody, my name is KirkpattieCake. I'm an author and robot, and today we're going to be reading the first lines, which actually turned into the first paragraphs of books. But before we get started, just a couple of announcements. Number one is, of course, that the April LBRY is open down in the description below. If you've never been on this channel before, LBRY is the last month I asked you, giving you a prompt, and all you gotta do is respond to the prompt with your own short story or a portion of a longer story that fits into the prompt. And in the first video of the following month, we just read what you guys wrote. So maybe if you haven't submitted before, consider it. And if you have, thank you so much for submitting, and I look forward to reading you next month. The second thing is the Dead End Drive audiobook is coming along, and we're finalizing the recordings. The voice actor and I, and the book is going to be so good. He is so talented, so kind, so full of heart when he's reading, and he's definitely going to be somebody to watch. I've linked his Twitch down in the description below, where he read Dead End Drive when he was recording that, and I'm sure he'll shoot further videos or further audiobooks in the future at that location. I know for sure that when he works on my next book, he'll have permission to shoot it on there as well, so, you know, hang out, enjoy, it's a lot of fun. And so there's that. Final thing that I want to announce, obviously because it's kind of a requirement. If you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like the video, share it around, subscribe for more. You know, you guys are the only ways that people probably find me, I think, unless I think I piss somebody off with one of my other ideas. But when you're just a little nobody like me, having anybody know what you're saying is kind of like, I don't know if anybody actually finds me. So without further ado, let's get started with first lines. There's so much advice on how to start out a book, where to start out a book, what you should do to start out a book. Is it exposition? Do you explain a character? Do you use dialogue? Do you use description? Do you start with action? Do you start with a prologue that's some action point or some point of tension that's in the middle of the book? There's just so many, or do you do a combination of all of the above or a couple of the above? There are just so many ways to start a story, so many ways recommended to start a story, and at the end of the day, it all depends on what you are trying to accomplish as an author when you start out the story. Now, I obviously have my recommendations and what I think are better ways to start a story, but that's for another video. Right now, we're going to be reading examples that other authors give of how they start a story, and then kind of examining what their choices did for the vibe of the story, for the tension of the story, to reveal what kind of plot we're in for. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the description below on if you have any favorites of these readings, if you've read any of these books, and if you have any suggestions for the future, because I'd love to continue this series of reading the first lines, which is actually reading the first paragraphs to get a vibe, and just talking about what we see. So the first book on the list is Carrie and Comfort by Dan Simmons, and Carrie and Comfort is one of my favorite books. It's a horror novel, one of the best horror novels I can think of, and one of the best examples of a multi-POV story as well. It is pretty thick though. So let's see how Dan Simmons starts his horror novel. Nina was going to take credit for the death of that beetle, John. I thought that was in very bad taste. She had her scrapbook laid out on my mahogany coffee table, newspaper clippings neatly arranged in chronological order, the bald statements of death recording all of her feedings. Nina Drayton's smile was as radiant as ever, but her pale blue eyes showed no hint of warmth. So that's the end of the first paragraph in Carrie and Comfort, and you already get the sense, one, there's feedings and there's death, and she's proudly taking credit for the death of some famous person. So there's some psychopathy happening here. Then you've got Nina Drayton's smile is radiant, so you've got this beautiful woman, but there's something off about her, that there's no warmth in her beauty. So we know that there's some kind of creepy situation going on here, and the narrator is intimate with Nina because it's the first person, and they're sitting down, that bragging is taking place at a coffee table, which means they're friendly. So what is going on here? It's so personable. And it's interesting reading the story behind how Carrie and Comfort got started for Dan Simmons, because he mentioned having a dream of like an old lady running through the woods dodging a helicopter, and that moment does actually show up later in the book. But so just that dream of an old lady running around dodging a helicopter in the woods, and actually also being the bad guy, because that's also what he had. He had just this feeling that she was just this despicable person. created in him the inspiration or the feelings that he needed to craft this book, this what I would call a masterpiece, quite honestly. So there's Dan Simmons starting a book. Would you continue reading? No? Yes? No? The next book is Hell House by Richard Matheson. He writes, "It had been raining hard since 5 o'clock that morning. Brontinian weather, Mr. Barrett thought. He repressed a smile. He felt rather like a character in some latter-day Gothic romance. The driving rain, the cold, the 2-hour ride from Manhattan in one of the Deutsche's long black leather-upholstered limousines. The interminable wait in the corridor while disconcerted-looking men and women hurried in and out of the Deutsche's bedroom, glancing at him occasionally." So this has a different vibe than the above because something bad is happening. He doesn't necessarily know the people or wherever he is, and he's also recognizing that he's in some kind of what's like a stereotypical situation, it seems. The vibe, he's obviously a doctor, and the vibe for this actually feels more clinical than more friendly, versus more friendly, which is what Curie and Comfort seemed like. The next two are among my favorite books because I am very inspired by Bret Easton Ellis. He is probably the author I go to most when I need to figure out how to do something because I really like his writing style. So American Psycho starts out, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," is scrawled in blood-red lettering on the side of the Chemical Bank near the corner of 11th and 1st, and is in print large enough to be seen from the backseat of the cab as it lurches forward in the traffic leaving Wall Street, and it's just as Timothy Price notices the words, a bus pulls up, the advertisement for Les Miserables on its side blocking the view, but Price, who is with Pierce & Pierce and 26 and doesn't seem to care because he tells the driver he will give him $5 to turn up the radio, "Be My Baby" on WYNN, and the driver, black, not American, does. So that's the end of that paragraph. And again, the vibe is completely different. We've got, well, Curie and Comfort talked about what she was looking at and also introduced a person. Hell House introduced kind of an atmosphere. American Psycho also introduced an atmosphere, a setting. We know that we're in New York, and we also noticed, at least I noticed, because I'm looking at the pages, the first paragraph of American Psycho is also one run-on sentence, which goes with that New Yorker attitude of always on the go, always talking, kind of getting the most information out at once. And so he's made this setting of this person on the go, constantly making observations, knowing where stuff is, knowing when stuff is normal, and very casual about it. The next one is also Bret Easton Ellis, because I already mentioned he's like one of my favorites, so I'm going to share what one of my favorites is. When I originally thought of doing first lines of novels, I was like, my favorite Bret Easton Ellis books are going to be in here because they're just fun. They start out fun, they're like snappy. He's so good with dialogue. Anyway, so this is Glamorama by Bret Easton Ellis. Specs all over the third panel. See, no, that one, the second one from the floor. And I wanted to point this out to someone yesterday, but a photo shoot intervened, and Yaki Nakamori, or whatever the hell the designer's name is, a master craftsman, mistook me for someone else, so I couldn't register the complaint. But gentlemen and ladies, there they are. Specks, annoying, tiny specks. And they don't look accidental, but like they were somehow done by a machine. So I don't want a lot of description, just the story. Streamlined, no frills, the lowdown. Who, what, where, when, and don't leave out the why. Though I'm getting this distinct impression by the look on your sorry faces that why won't get answered. Now, come on, god damn it. What's the story? So, obviously the beginning of Glamorama is, well, one, it's dialogue, and then two, it's a monologue of somebody who's kind of stressed, kind of constantly talking, and kind of impatient, maybe a little bit pompous, he might be pompous. It's kind of hard to tell if he is pompous specifically or if he's just stressed out in this. But the voice is so good, the dialogue so good. You can hear him just like looking at specific people and being dismissive in the voice, and it's just, ugh. One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus is a book that I read last year. It is a YA that is, I would call it Gossip Girl meets, like, it tries to be Breakfast Club. It's not really Breakfast Club, but it's Gossip Girl meets Pretty Little Liars and Breakfast Club. And it starts out with, a sex tape, a pregnancy scare, 2 cheating scandals, and that's just this week's update. If all you knew of Bayview High was Simon Keller's gossip app, you'd wonder how anyone found time to go to class. So, much shorter paragraph, which is also interesting to me. So Bret Easton Ellis has longer paragraphs, and when you read my work, you'll also notice that my work kind of has longer paragraphs in starting. So Karen McManus has much shorter first paragraph, or establishing paragraph, if we want to call it that. But you do get an idea of what the story is going to be about, which is heavily inspired by gossip, heavily inspired by like an application, some technology, drama between students. So that's good for Karen McManus in setting the expectations of the story. And the character voice in this specific paragraph is also fairly strong. The next story is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This was another story that I read last year. I actually reviewed it on this channel. I also reviewed When No One Is Watching, I also reviewed One of Us Is Lying on this channel, if you want to go check those out after this video. And When No One Is Watching started out, I spent deepest winter shuffling back and forth between work and hospital and visits and doctor's appointments. I spent spring hermiting away, managing my depression with the help of a CBD pen and generous pours of the Henny I'd found in Mommy's liquor cabinet. So that story obviously starts out with something dramatic is happening in her life. This character is depressed. This character is surrounded by maybe death or pain or sickness to the point that she's drinking and using drugs to kind of self-medicate for those things. And this, for me, this description also has, or this narration is much more slowed down. So that kind of goes with this idea of like dragging along, or the depression, which usually makes you feel heavier. It makes you not want to move. Whereas if we look at Bret Easton Ellis's, they're both socialites. They're both in high pressure situations. And so they're both like click, 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 click. Like, we got to get going. The next one is A Stranger in the House by Sherry Lapina. And I read this last year, but I didn't do a review of it. I don't even remember if I reviewed it on Goodreads, but it was a domestic thriller. I thought it would be about ghosts. I just kind of found it randomly when I was looking for books, and I thought it'd be about ghosts. Spoiler alert, it wasn't about ghosts. It starts out, on this hot August night, Tom Krupp parks his car, a leased Lexus, in the driveway of his handsome 2-story home. The house, complete with a 2-car garage, is set behind a generous lawn and framed with beautiful trees. To the right of the driveway, a flagstone path crosses in front of the porch, with steps leading up to the solid wooden door in the middle of the house. To the right of the front door is a large picture window, the width of the living room. And so then that's the end of that paragraph. And obviously, more of what's happening here is setting. We kind of get a look into what this guy's life is like. He's decently well off. He's a family man of some kind because he's got this nice house, returning home, possibly from work, but he's not doing so well that he actually owns a Lexus. He's just leasing a Lexus. But the house is handsome. And I don't know about you, maybe it's because I know the book now since I read the book, but if it's a domestic thriller, then introducing him coming home to his house, that makes sense. It's got this slow pace. I think it's even got a mild, I don't know if I could say that had a build up in it. It's just kind of describing his neighborhood, planting you in the story, in the setting, to see what's around you before the story gets started. And you're sort of walking into the surprise with Tom at this point. So the next one is The Cyborg Tinkerer by May Latour, and her opening paragraph is one sentence. So I grabbed the first couple of paragraphs that she has because all of them are short paragraphs at the start of her book. Very, very different from Bret Easton Ellis or even Shuri Lapina, who had a longer first paragraph. Meg likes to do short and choppy for the most part until she gets into exposition, and then she goes on. So Meg's book starts out with, sometimes death required a change of scenery. Gwendolyn Grimm marched up the warped wooden steps of the crusty Tulip. As she shouldered her pack, a single thought formed in her mind. Good fucking riddance. She wouldn't miss being the ship tinkerer on this creaking bucket of soured engines and deflated tits for sails. And so then after that, she goes into describing the workmen and like the moon planet that she's just landed on. But so that gives you the vibe of the story, or the vibe of this character at the very least. And you can see that she's kind of moody. And you can see, I think that you can get into the vibe that this is going to be a fairly pessimistic POV because of the way that she describes the soured engines and the deflated tits for sale. She obviously didn't really like being a tinkerer. She says, good freaking riddance. So you're like, well, what got you into this work? How long have you been doing this work? Why do you hate this work so much? Those are all kind of questions that I have because she's just so spiteful. So what kind of difference is she about to make? It doesn't take long for us to know that the difference that she's making is because she is dying. And she reminds you of that 20 times in the first 2 chapters until she's not dying anymore. The next example is The Scarlet Gospels by Clive Barker, and his first paragraph is also very short. I didn't grab extra paragraphs after this because the first paragraph, the first couple of paragraphs in The Scarlet Gospels is like conversation happening. So this book starts off with, after the long quiet of the grave, Joseph Rogowski gave voice, and it was not pleasant in either sound or sentiment. So we can tell something's going on here because he gave voice after being in the grave there doing a summoning. And well, a lot of the following scene turns into some kind of expositional discussion back and forth, and then some bad things happen. It's actually, I think it's actually a prologue if I remember correctly. I did grab a second Clive Barker book to compare that opening to because his first book, The Hellbound Heart, actually had a much longer opening paragraph and did more to create the setting. So let's take a look at that compared to what his more recent book, which was The Scarlet Gospels. The Hellbound Heart actually starts out with, Frank had seen similar puzzles, mostly in Hong Kong, products of the Chinese taste for making metaphysics of hard wood. But in the acuity and technical genius of the Chinese, the Frenchman had brought a perverse logic that was entirely his own. If there was a system to the puzzle, Frank had failed to find it. Only after several hours of trial and error did a chance juxtaposition of thumbs, middle and last finger bear fruit, an almost imperceptible click, and then victory. A segment of the box slid out from beside its neighbors. So that obviously starts off with some kind of treasure, a puzzle box, a hard puzzle that took him hours to solve, and then figuring out how to open it. So that leaves the reader going, well, what the frick is in the box? Why did he spend so much time with it? The next opening that I'd like to share is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. The study was filled with the rich odor of roses, and when the light summer wind stirred amidst the trees of the garden, there came through the window door the heavy scent of lilac, or the most delicate perfume of pink flowering thorn. And that's the end of that. So he just paints the picture for you, mostly in scent, but you've got a large picture window and summer and trees. I can actually kind of, if I focus on it, I can actually just hear the trees with the soft wind. That's a very good way to get readers into the setting without putting a whole ton of description to get readers into the setting. So the next one is Perfume by Patrick Suskind. I also read this a little while ago, and it was a very good book. I would highly recommend reading it. The names are in French, so when I say Jean-Baptiste's last name here, probably going to get it wrong. Please accept me for this. I am sorry. In 18th century France, there lived a man who was one of the most gifted and abominable personages in an era that knew no lack of gifted and abominable personages. His story will be told here. His name was Jean-Baptiste Grigny. And if his name, in contrast to the names of other gifted abominations, de Sade, for instance, or Saint Just, or Fauch, or Bonaparte, etc., it is certainly not because Grigny fell short of those more famous backguards when it came to arrogance, misanthropy, immorality, or, more succinctly, to wickedness, but because his gift and his sole ambition were restricted to a domain that leaves no traces in history, to the fleeting realm of scent. I really like that intro because, one, Perfume is a historical fiction, and it does a really good job of painting Grigny like he was a real person that existed and telling the story as if it's nonfiction when it's fiction the whole time. And it lets you know that, one, this is going to be a story about a diabolical or a terrible person, you know, even comparing it to de Sade and Bonaparte and other terrors. but giving you that intrigue that he was not just misanthropic or arrogant or immoral or terrible, but he had an obsession, and it was scent. And his obsession left no traces behind. So I highly recommend that book. I loved that book. And it's a very good character study on how to write obsession, I think. So in closing out this video, how inappropriate would it be if I didn't at least share some of my opening lines or opening paragraphs? So the first I'm going to share is Dead End Drive's opening paragraph, and it's going to be read by my fantastic audio book actor. Not live, unfortunately, but I'm going to play the first bit of his recording.
The sun was always brightest, and the air sweeter on days when misfortune struck the Benedict estate. The rising sun warmly lit the conservatory, reflecting brilliantly through the glass walls. Flowers and vines hung from the ceiling, sat potted in colorful artisan vases, and grew around the furniture. Kelly Benedict, the 14-year-old adopted son of the Benedict estate heiress Agatha, sat at a round, lattice table that was not only years older than him, but much more sophisticated than the boy could ever hope to be. Steel bent into angel wings, and misshapen hearts held up the glass tabletop. He impatiently tapped his finger, watching the door for his mother's usual entrance that would sadly not come today.
Well, obviously, my opening paragraph in Dead End Drive focuses more on creating the setting of the room, but also that something different is off. You've got the expectations of the child that something that it normally happens is going to happen, but the contradiction of that behavior by the narrator saying what he expects to happen is not going to happen today. The narrator's also got a sort of mood to him when he starts out. The things are always brighter and sweeter when misfortune is going to strike, which tells you that there is something possibly magical happening in this place. So the last thing that I'm going to share today is the opening paragraph of my upcoming novel, Bleed More, Body More. And this is really the first time it's getting to anyone other than my crypt partners, so thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy. You sure pick the best places to break down, don't you, Way? I'm saying to myself in the cab of a Bodymore tow truck as I pull to the west entrance of the park. My phone sits in the cup holder. Wayland still hasn't messaged me back with where he's parked, and finding him in the dark is going to be a bitch and a half. The moon came up an hour ago. The moon came up about an hour ago. Of course, Wayland waited until the sun went down to call in for a tow in the Baltimore body dumping ground. This time of year, it feels like the sun's out all afternoon until suddenly it's not, and you don't see it coming. Sometimes it feels like things don't exist if the streetlights aren't shining over them. The lights at the park's entrance are unreliable, and by the time you reach Dead Run, you're lucky if any of the lights are still on. Tonight is one of those nights where my headlights are the only thing keeping the streets lit. The city lights from downtown brighten the horizon beyond the trees, and it feels like a different world than the one in this godforsaken park. City Hall's on the other side of the trees. City Hall's on the other side of the trees. The town center, West Baltimore, the airport, parts of the city betray the rest of it. Gwen's Falls isn't even so bad until the lights go out. Then tree branches droop, leaves turn gray, the water turns black. Then the stink of rot and death rise out of the mud and grass. The map calls it Gwen's Falls, or Leakin Park, but locals call it something more honest, Murder Park. And so in that you could see there's more character. It's the first line of text is dialogue, and then it goes into setting up the scene, kind of giving the city character, and just how much focus it gives on setting up Baltimore as the location kind of says a lot about where the story is going to go or what's going to be important in the story. Whereas like if you look at Dead End Drive, it gave the description of the conservatory room more focus, but not necessarily where that was placed in. You can also see more urgency in Bleed More, Body More versus Dead End Drive, which kind of goes with how the narrator in that is more informed than the main character or the boy being introduced in Dead End Drive. He's obviously not informed about what's going on at the start of that book. So you can kind of see a contrast between the different ways that stories introduce. Let me know what your thoughts are on the stories, the intros shared Let me know what your thoughts are on the intros shared in this video. What were your favorites? What were your least favorites? What did you like and what did you dislike? And what do you normally do in your stories? I look forward to seeing what you guys have to say. And until next time, please remember to like this video for more. Send me your ideas or your books that you guys like the beginnings of or books that you guys hate the beginnings of, and we can read more of these openers. We can do another opener video. And until next time, happy Monday and don't die. Dear Madam Astra, that's me. We regret to inform you that on August 1st, your employer, Agatha Jane Benedict, owner of the Benedict estate, peacefully passed away in her sleep. Oh, that's so sad. Wait. Let me try that again. Oh my goodness, that's so sad. Yeah, I think I'm ready. With millions of dollars on the line and the opportunity for your every need to be taken care of for life, tell me, is there anything more valuable than that? I didn't think so. Dead End Drive is a dark comedy novel that makes 3 promises. 1, an illustrious estate in Louisiana. 2, an opulent dinner affair for all in attendance. And 3, and most importantly of all, lots and lots of competitive murder. So if you're looking for a cozy book to settle in with for the spooky season, I've only got one question for you. Will I see you at the will reading?
Only losers lose!